Welcome to the Filmlings podcast,
a podcast all'italiana where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 151, Sergio's Spaghetti.
The spaghetti. It's a
Sergio's
Western spaghetti. Yes. It was a,
I should have called this
enough,
Not Your Mom's Spaghetti.
Mom spaghetti. Ironically enough, the term spaghetti Western was coined by a Spaniard for films shot in Italy that were originally shot in Spain before being moved to Italy, and then even still were kind of shot half in Italy and half in Spain.
I'm partial to the Japanese term macaroni Western.
I saw that one too. The macaroni Western. I like that we're not the only ones who are like Italians. Pasta.
Yep.
It's global. But yeah, spaghetti westerns are a subgenre of the Western genre, which we'll be talking about today on the show. Primarily made in Europe through the 1960s and 1970s. They really weren't around that long, but they were highly influential on the genre. And because of when they came out, they're probably pretty dominant in the concept of the Western in terms of people who are currently alive, like our parents, us, the little whippersnappers who are just starting to watch movies. This is the genre, the version of the genre that's probably most familiar to a lot of them. And perhaps no one set the tone for the spaghetti Western more than Sergio Leone. There were other people who... There were more people who were involved in it, a lot of really major players in the scene, but the scene was very short-lived, about a decade long in its primacy, and really no one dominated it more than Sergio Leone, and with not that many movies either.
I know, I was surprised about that.
Yeah,
he basically invented it and just carries the bulk of what this genre is on his shoulders.
Yeah. He kind of did what Tarantino claimed he's going to do, where he's like, I made X number of movies and bounced.
Yeah.
Except Sergio Leone actually bounced. But we don't know whether or not Tarantino will. Who knows? We'll see. But anyway, back to Sergio Leone. He was born in Rome in 1929. And he was born to a film director who went by the at least working name of Roberto Roberti, and silent film actress Bice Valerian. That was also not her real name. I do not remember her real name. Her screen name was just so interesting that I had to go with that.
That's what her Wikipedia page is under. So.
Yeah, right. And if it wasn't for like the if you look at the year Leone was born 1929. If it wasn't for the devastation in his immediate future of the Great Depression followed by World War II, you would have to call him. You'd have to be like, oh, Leone, he's a nepo baby. But his childhood was rocked to bits by the Great Depression and World War II. So yeah, maybe not really a nepo baby at that point. But anyway, as a kid, he did go to school with one Ennio Morricone. I should know how to.
I always say Morricone.
Names.
So
is it Morricone?
Yeah.
Morricone, who would later become his collaborator and an epic composer who you probably all know if you're familiar with film OSTs of any kind. And then Leone himself started in the Italian film industry at 18 years old as an assistant on, get this, the movie Bicycle Thieves, the famous film that kicked off the Italian neorealism movement. And if you want to learn more about that, go check out episode 24 of the Filmlings from our world tour, where we talked about the Italian neorealist movement. And then in the 1950s, he began writing screenplays for the sword and sandal epics that were popular at the time. Think movies like Ben-Hur, big historical epics.
Actually, I think specifically Ben-Hur.
Themes. Ben-Hur is a big one, right? That's one of the big ones. I think he worked on it. I don't think he wrote the screenplay for it, but he was
assistant director, I think. Also Quo Vadis, which was big, but no one remembers that one.
I mean, these, and this is important to Leone's story, but these films are huge that were being made. These sword and sandal epics at Cinecittà. That's the name of the studio. And that studio was financially backed by American studios as well. So there's a deep connection to Hollywood production values and ties, being produced in Italy because it was cheaper. And they had a wider variety of the natural backdrops and scenic backdrops that they were looking for these particular films, as well as proximity to places like Tunisia, where a lot of these sword and sandal epics were also co-location shot. In addition, like you said, Jonathan, he got work as an assistant director because there were 5 million units for one of these giant productions. And he got a lot of experience in that, specifically making stuff that was on a large scale for a low budget, and that would be important throughout his career. Leone finally got his chance to direct a film when the original director fell ill, and Leone stepped in to finish directing the epic The Last Days of Pompeii from 1959, and began directing other films in his own right after that point, with a skill set that was geared toward making the small budgets of the Cinecittà studios look like big Hollywood productions. And then finally, he got to direct his own breakout hit that was away from the sword and sandal genre, A Fistful of Dollars from 1964.
In the most classic way, by straight ripping it off.
Yep. It's a fascinating story about how this story got to where it was. As taste shifted away from sword and sandal films and towards Westerns being produced in Europe in the 1960s. The film is based on Yojimbo very blatantly, Yojimbo being the 1961 film made by Kurosawa. Kurosawa did file some sort of legal challenge to it. I don't know the specifics about it, but I do know it didn't go anywhere, mostly because Yojimbo is in turn most likely based off of the Dashiell Hammett novel from 1929 called Red Harvest, which means the legal footing of anybody in the case was not that sound, but it was a good enough story to be ripped off by two epic directors, so that tells you a lot about what was going on there. We did do a deep dive comparison of A Fistful of Dollars from 1964 and Yojimbo way back in episode 14, our first Samurai and Sombreros episode, if you want to go check that out. This film also served as the breakout role for one American TV actor who was kind of unknown at that point, Clint Eastwood, who would go on to have a very important career with Leone, both working in Leone's films and then going off and making his own spaghetti westerns, both in Europe and in America. Leone's take on the cowboy, deconstructed and deglamorized, sweaty, greedy, and morally ambiguous at best, was a huge hit for the morally ambiguous in their own right 1960s and kicked off the spaghetti western genre into high gear. It wasn't the first movie in that genre, but it was like the first super significant one that kind of defined the tastes of that genre. He would go on to finish his Man with No Name or The Dollars trilogy, with For a Few Dollars More from 1965 and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly also covered on this show in the past on episode 60. As you can tell, there was a reason we did a tie-up Western arc.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We've touched it so much. He worked directly with an American studio, Paramount, for his next film, Once Upon a Time in the West from 1968, which was even shot in a small part in Monument Valley, harkening back to the days of one John Ford, who was actually still working at the time. That was in parallel more than it was sequential. His next film, Duck You Sucker, from 1971, also known as A Fistful of Dynamite, was supposed
Alex,
to be...
there's a comma in there. It's Duck You Sucker.
Oh, sorry. Duck You Sucker.
With the James Coburn accent.
Best James Coburn, angry Irishman. Duck You Sucker or something like that.
It's pretty good.
Was supposed to be directed by Peter Bogdanovich, who we've also covered ad nauseum on this podcast, while Leone only produced, which would be the role he would later settle into. But due to creative differences, Leone went back to the directing helm on this film as well. If I recall, this was also the point in Bogdanovich's career where he entered the slump. So yeah, I think it was after his Big Boom trilogy.
Yeah.
So that kind of lines up a little bit. If it's not exactly dead on, it's pretty close.
Well, I just have to plug all the things. So we covered Bogdanovich on episode 49.
Oh, there you go.
There are so many touchstones from this episode.
Well, the thing is, we've covered so much of film history at this point that like it kind of makes sense to tie all these threads together. And that's what I've liked doing about this series so far.
Oh, yeah.
Is getting to tie all these threads together in this bigger tapestry where you can see some of this context. But yes, we did cover Peter Bogdanovich before. And what'd you say, episode 49?
Yep.
Episode 49. In the 70s, Sergio Leone stepped back into mostly only producing films, most of them spaghetti westerns, but not all, and turning down directing gigs that were offered him, including The Godfather, that's an interesting version of The Godfather to consider.
Well, it sounds like that pretty much turned into Once Upon a Time in America.
Yes. Yeah, actually. Yeah, in a lot of ways. And I think one of the big reasons that Leone stepped back from directing at this point in time was that he was hard at work with what would be his final film, Once Upon a Time in America from 1984, which is a film he spent 10 years working on. Not 10 years shooting, but 10 years working on pre-production. The final cut of the movie, not the theatrical release in America, which was chopped to bits, but the theatrical release that was played at Cannes that received a 20-minute standing ovation, was like 4.5 hours.
My
so
gosh.
It's a huge movie. He spent 10 years preparing it.
Cut.
Yeah. It's based on the novel The Hoods by Harry Gray, who was a mobster in his own right. This was Sergio Leone's magnum opus, his final films, in many ways, both a Western and not a Western at the same time. It's set in the Jewish neighborhoods of early 1900s New York, following four friends from childhood to adulthood, and what is essentially the Wild West of New York City. Is the best way I can describe it. It's a very good movie. When I first tried to watch it, I did not have the attention span for it. I want to go back and try to watch it again. But yeah, it is sincerely a fantastic movie. It was also the first non-Western film he made in 25 years since his directorial debut. But unfortunately, that would be his final film. He would pass away only 5 years later in 1989 at the age of 60 from a heart attack unsuspectedly. And when he died with a few unrealized projects that actually sound quite interesting. And while we don't always talk about these on the podcast, I did want to at least mention them before we dive into the movies, because some of them sound quite interesting, especially considering like Leone's particular touches. I will also say that almost all of them sound like they could also be Tarantino films. So the first one is called
Tarantino did like Sergio Leone. Just
yes, very that is
Django.
very clear, especially after that. Django actually is like a famous spaghetti western character. It's not Sergio Leone's. I think it's Sergio Corbucci's. I don't know. I get all my spaghetti western directors mixed up.
I think you have to change your name to Sergio if you're Italian and going to direct a Western.
Dude, like half the people credited on these movies are named Sergio. It's crazy, besides Sergio Leone. But yeah, the first one I wanted to mention is called A Place Only Mary Knows. It's a Western set during the Civil War, but not about the Civil War. It tells the story of a Union drafter, a Southern businessman, a shady Southern businessman. I want to be clear. All of these people are shady. A freed slave and an Italian immigrant search for the buried treasure from a failed heist in a Southern town. And the person who hid the money was Mary, but Mary's gone now. So they're looking for a place that only Mary knows to recover all this money, set against the backdrop of I think the final days of the Civil War, as I think like Atlanta comes under siege. So it is, it sounds like it could be a very good Leone movie, but also a very good Tarantino movie, where those two styles touch and there's a lot of overlap.
Just that lineup of the cartoonish characters is so Tarantino.
Yes, like the very like this character embodies a whole archetype of this era. Like that is definitely something that is one, very present in Leone's work, and two, very present in Tarantino's work, and three, those two things are not disconnected.
Right.
The next idea that he had was called Leningrad, the 900 Days. That probably would not have been the final title of the movie. I really doubt that would have passed marketing.
At least in
but
America.
It's based on the nonfiction book of the same name, and the film would have focused on an American photographer, I believe to have been played by Robert De Niro, who was caught in the city of Leningrad as the Nazi army lays siege. He covers the battle, the Luftwaffe attacks, the attacks on the city walls. He falls in love with one of the Russian freedom fighters. Him and this woman even, I think, get married and have a baby at one point. And like, there's a tragic outcome in the end, as you would suspect. But yeah, it's quite a extensive story, because I mean, the Siege of Leningrad is a thing, but like 900 days, I just realized is like almost 3 years.
Yeah, that's a huge scope.
That's a huge battle. So yeah, in one that is easily that would have been cool to see Leone do his thing outside of the Western context in a war context. That would have been cool. But two, we know that Tarantino likes to do a good World War II movie. So that is, like I said, my supposition that these are all also Tarantino ideas is not wrong on this one as well. And then the last one I wanted to mention, just because almost every 20th century director had an unrealized Don Quixote project, is that Sergio Leone as well had an unrealized Don Quixote project, because you're not a 20th century director unless you tried to make Don Quixote.
I think I've said this before, but making a Don Quixote film is literally the most quixotic thing you can do.
It really is. It's so like ironic. I wonder if there's like a backdoor like signed contract thing at the DGA we don't know about, where it's like
Don Quixote has been blacklisted.
You can't make this movie, but you can try to make this movie, but you have to fail at making this movie. You try to make the movie. But also, I wanted to point out that it was planned for Clint Eastwood to have played Don Quixote.
That would have been so interesting.
It would have been crazy. All right, Jonathan, that is kind of like the brief of the Sergio Leone story, but what are the films we're going to be using to look at it today? Because we've already done a good number of his movies on this podcast at various points, so there's only a few left really we can talk about, but what are they?
Yeah, so we're basically filling in the holes, or the notable holes in his canon as they relate to Westerns. We've already done A Fistful of Dollars, as we stated, with relation to Yojimbo. So we're doing the sequel to A Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more from 1965, which is not a remake of Sanjuro, for anyone wondering. Directed by
disconnected sequel. Yeah,
disconnected sequel. Directed by Sergio Leone, screenplay by Luciano Vincenzoni, Sergio Leone, and Sergio Donati. Which, as I stated, is a sequel to A Fistful of Dollars. It stars Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Gian Maria Volonte. Cinematography by Massimo Dallamano, and score by Ennio Morricone. Then we'll be following
we're going to an Italian class today.
I know, right? At least with Italian ones, I can just, actually read all the letters and just pronounce all the vowels. And then we're not doing The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because as we stated, we already did that one, although we've also
done The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
We also did The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, which was weird, but a lot of fun. So yeah, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is also a towering piece in his oeuvre, but we are going to Once Upon a Time in the West from 1968, directed, as you can imagine, by Sergio Leone. Screenplay by Sergio Leone and Sergio Donati. Starring Charles Bronson, Henry Fonda, which will be fun to talk about, Claudia Cardinale, and Jason Robards. Cinematography by Tonino Deli Colli. Score by Ennio Morricone. And finally...
I love the name Tonino, because it's like, is he named Tony? His name is Tony?
Tony, no. Tonino, no. Oh, gosh. His whole name, Tonino Deli Colli. It's great. He was made for show business. And finally, we're talking about Duck, You Sucker from 1971, also known as A Fistful of Dynamite, depending on which one you would buy a ticket to. Directed by Sergio Leone. Screenplay by Luciano Vincenzoni. Sergio Leone. Vincenzoni. Oh, I forgot they add in that with the C's. And Sergio Donati. Starring Rod Steiger, James Coburn, and Romolo Valli. Cinematography by Giuseppe Rosolini. Score by Ennio Morricone. Whew. All the vowels.
You okay there?
I made it.
We got to get some French movies in here for you to pronounce French stuff on.
Yeah, you only have to say half the word. It's great.
You just give up halfway through and you boom, you've got French.
All right, let's get into our movies, starting with For a Few Dollars More from 1965. Jason, take it away.
For a Few Dollars More from 1965. The man sometimes called Manco is out after the bounty of a lifetime. El Indio, a murderous and calculated bank robber, has been busted out of jail by his gang. Manco teams up with another bounty hunter, Colonel Mortimer, who has a mysterious and dark connection to El Indio. Together, they infiltrate the gang as El Indio targets the $1 million bank vault of the Bank of El Paso, with Manco and Mortimer aiming for the hefty bounty on the collected heads of the robbers.
Is this going to be one of the episodes where you use sound cues? Because
I really should.
We've got the harmonica, or the music box, and then just the really over the top motif from Duck, You Sucker.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we're gonna get into that. I mean, the music is kind of a great place to start. I wish the problem is that every time I try and remember the themes to any of these movies, just The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the only one that comes to my head.
I mean, it's the most iconic.
It is. But yeah, I kind of do want to throw that out there. We might as well start with it because Ennio Morricone becomes almost as iconic to the Western genre through these spaghetti Westerns as cowboy hats or, dusty, windy towns, because these musical themes are so prevalent. I mean, for one thing, he does the pop music thing where if you play something often enough, then you can trick people into thinking that it's really clever. But he really does do a good job of incorporating them into the story. So in this film and the next film, we're going to see that he's using these musical themes to really set the audience expectations and build the tension and the drama as we go through the story. So here we have the music box that it's a mystery, and it's this thing that is following Lee Van Cleef's character throughout the story, and we don't get the full picture of it. Actually, this one we kind of get the full picture of it halfway through, but that's the other thing, is the way that these backstories are weaved in through all three of these stories. He uses this tiny little breadcrumb trail of a backstory to keep us going all the way up to the final duel. And it's always super dramatic, and it's always just vague enough to be basically believable and dramatic enough to keep us invested to the very end.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot about the plot structure of these movies that kind of reminds me of like good anime. Good shonen anime.
I think a lot of stuff that we're going to be comparing in this episode, the actual influence goes the opposite direction, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah. We're essentially uncovering the origins of some stuff, right? Or like how something became popular. And this is just a really popular way of telling like a pop story where essentially there's definitely a mystery that ties everything together. and it happened in the past and set all these things in motion. But we don't really know what's actually going on for most of the movie. We're just kind of stumbling along and we get hints of what it really was and what's driving all these characters. And then at the end, when it's revealed, one, it's a really cool plot moment because this, either like an auditory or visual presence in the story is finally explained. Normally, one of Ennio Morricone's score stingers, and then or score motifs. But then also like the personal relevance is explained, and then everyone suddenly has this very sad backstory, and you're like, you already had like sympathy developing for the characters over the course of the movie, and that's often done by the story just being told from their viewpoint. There's a reason why we start this one with Lee Van Cleef's character instead of with the man with no name.
Right.
It gives him kind of primacy of sympathy with the audience, and we tell so much from his viewpoint over the course of the movie. And then, so you already have sympathy for this character, and then once it's confirmed that he has the sad story at the end, you're like, oh man, I knew I liked him, and now I want him to win even more. And then when he does win, that last moment bump in the revealing of the secret just kind of emphasizes or heightens the catharsis even deeper once you give it all that more relevance about why it would be, why it should be, why you want it to be resolved in one direction or another.
And it's really genius to put those two things literally back to back. You've been sprinkling in the backstory, and then when you give us the full picture, you're at your height of your sympathy for the character right at the moment when you get that catharsis. So he literally is setting up a 1-2 punch, emotional punch for the audience. And it works so good because there is so much buildup and there's so much emotion with the score and with everything about what the character has gone through to get to this final duel. And so even though you basically know how the duel is going to end, it still works because he's set it up so well.
Yeah. And he loves to use tension and release. All good movies use tension and release, but Leone like revels in it. Like his tension build is so slow and low that you don't even realize how antsy you are.
Right.
Until everyone's squinting at each other in these extreme close-ups. And he literally builds, he doesn't just build the tension, he builds it to the point where you as an audience member are sitting there like about ready to scream, just shoot each other already.
Yeah. He knows that moment when it can't hold. Yeah. He knows the moment where it can't hold any longer. And that's when the guns fire.
Yeah, exactly. And in a lot of ways, I did think the final duel in this movie kind of feels like a dry run for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh, yeah.
It's in the circle. There's 3 characters. They're not all pointing guns at each other. But, well, they are for some point, although it's not truly a three-way duel.
Everyone knows he's not part of the duel.
Yeah. He's just enforcing the duel.
He's keeping it legit.
Yeah. So it kind of feels like a run up for that. And obviously Lee Van Cleef returns for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, although as a different character.
Yeah, it's cool to see him in the two basically opposed, like contrasting characters. Because here he's the ally of our man with no name hero, and in the other one he's the bad, literally the iconic bad guy in a Western. Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, this is a very Western movie. I mean, obviously in aesthetic, it's like iconic, all of these dusty locations, dusty cowboys, gunfights, bandits, stuff like that. But in a lot of ways, we do see a departure in this movie compared to a lot of the stuff we talked about in the silent era and the John Ford era.
Very much so, from silent era.
We see a departure in those themes to this movie because it's being, essentially the Western itself is being deconstructed to an extreme point. I feel like Leone does a lot of stuff to extreme points, but it's being deconstructed to an extreme point. Our heroes, instead of being lawmen or virtuous cowboys who are out to seek honor for their family, which is still a vendetta, these guys are just here either for money or for like a really like personal gritty vendetta. Everything here is not honorable. The most honor we see is the moment where Eastwood enforces the duel between Lee Van Cleef and El Indio at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Which is striking because we haven't seen a lot of honor from any character up until that point. But for the most part, everyone is just like down, dirty, selfish, self-centered. This is a cruel, hard version of the West that's unforgiving, and everyone is out for themselves. So it's in a lot of ways like the trappings of the West, the aesthetic value of the West, the mise en scène of the West is there, but it feels, the feeling of the West is much grittier. It's like the dark, gritty reboot of the West.
Except bright and sunny.
Except so sunny.
But yeah, no. I think this film especially, and again, this tone has already been set by A Fistful of Dollars, but this film especially digs its heels in on that because it starts with some opening title card about all the bandits in the West and there was not enough lawmen or something, and basically that's when the bounty killers came. And so that we're setting up with our two heroes are bounty hunters, right? So they're literally in it for the money, and we see them checking out wanted posters. The film literally ends with Clint Eastwood counting up how much he's going to make from all the bad guys that he got.
As he shovels their bodies onto a cart.
Yeah, exactly.
Just ragdolls them up there.
Yeah, but
how uncomfortable must that have been? I'm sorry
for the actors,
but for the actors, there's like 16 dudes piled on a cart pretending to be dead in like the noon sun.
Yeah,
like
you got to imagine there's a lot of dummies in there, but the ones on top are probably guys just flopping on top of each other. But yeah, you have this, like you said, this whole shift. This isn't Wyatt Earp trying to keep law and order in the town anymore. This is two guys who are literal mercenaries, looking out for their own skins. And you do, but the funny thing is that honor culture still seeps its way in, and it's what keeps us rooting for our two heroes in Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef's characters, because they have this kind of semi-formal partnership to go after all the bad guys, and they have to kind of split up and go. There actually is one scene that's almost straight out of Sanjuro when Clint Eastwood, who is pretending to be working for the gang, takes three of the guys out. And he's like, I got to go oversee them as we go. They're going to kill someone in the other town to get all the people to come away. And he kills the three guys and then rides back and says, oh my gosh, they overpowered us, which is almost straight out of Sanjuro. But
I mean, Sanjuro did come out 3 years before this. There is a non-zero chance that.
Yeah, and we know
actually,
that Sergio Leone has been keeping his eye on
some of this
Kurosawa.
is taken from Sanjuro. Yeah.
But he did better about mixing up the plot line a bit. But we have these,
actually, you know what? Now that you think about it, Clint Eastwood's character's like hands are hiding under his poncho half the time.
Yeah.
Kind of like how Toshiro Mifune's hands are inside his
Sanjuro always
his
keeps
top half the time.
Keeps his hands in.
Yeah. I was calling it like a hakama during the entirety of that episode, and then I realized afterwards that the hakama are the pants and not the top, and now I feel real dumb. But
it's the kimono, right? The top part.
It's like
no?
there's lots of words for it. Like
okay.
I don't know. I'll look it up for my own edification.
A few people who are pretty familiar with Japanese style were laughing their heads off. It's not that kind of movie, guys. All right. Yeah. So, but you have this partnership between Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood, and the ways that they honor that partnership are kind of what keeps us rooting for them, and also the slow revelation of Lee Van Cleef's backstory. So you have this veneer of
a Nagagi.
A what?
Sorry, a Nagagi.
Nagagi. Oh, interesting.
Nagagi. And then a hakama, which are the flowy pants on top of it, are like more formal wear.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you wear like a robe over that, it's called a haori.
There you go. Now we have to go write an amendment to the last episode.
Anyway.
Now you know. Yeah, so, but there's this veneer of every man for themselves, but there still is this underlying honor culture with our heroes, which is constantly violated by the bad guys, which is what keeps us rooting against them. But I really do think it's interesting to especially compare it even with the samurai films we were talking about last time, because we were talking about the Ronins, which are the masterless samurai, which is pretty close to the bounty killer kind of a thing here, except that
there's some connections there, yeah.
Right, but when we're talking about the ideal, at least, of the Ronin, the Musashi Miyamoto type, those guys, they're trying to win enough fights to get a roof over their head. It doesn't necessarily have to be, a fight to the death. Usually it is, but they're just trying to get a job. They're trying to get a roof over their head, and they're trying to better themselves and their craft. But here,
there is some concern with like the social order and morality.
Right. But here, it's literally just the money. I mean, it's reflected in the title.
Yeah.
But that's
money or a deep, dirty personal vendetta.
Well, it's both, because he's still a bounty hunter, but he is killing to live, and he's also using that to fuel his vendetta.
He's also living to kill.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's definitely this much grittier turn than the lawman trying to uphold order, or any of the John Ford films that we watched, which were about someone trying to bring progress, order to the West. This is just the Wild West being wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's also kind of like a compare contrast you can do with My Darling Clementine, because the main driving thread of that plot too.
That's what I was thinking the most of.
The idea of revenge. Yeah. But the way that the Wyatt brothers go about in terms of go about their revenge in that movie is honestly honorable. It's out in the open. They're being open about it. Mm-hmm. They're like, we are now the law, and we are looking for the criminal that killed our brother. And they're being very straightforward about it. Whereas Lee Van Cleef is kind of being like sneaky about it here. And he's being sneaky about it for a reason.
Yeah, to be fair, his story is a lot more sensitive.
Because he's being sneaky for a reason, because the world, this version of the West, if you were to go about what you were doing like the Wyatt brothers did in My Darling Clementine, you'd be dead before dusk.
Yeah.
You'd be making yourself very, very vulnerable. And that just kind of shows you how different these two worlds are. Like that, a lot of the trappings are the same, but the tone of the world is very different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think here we can talk about Clint Eastwood's character a lot, because The Man with No Name becomes one of the big tropes of what we think about the West now. And we've been talking about the different types, the different styles of kind of the Western cowboy leading man, and Clint Eastwood fills in that last big major hole, which is the silent but deadly type, basically. I don't know how else you would describe it, but he comes in, he doesn't say much, but he's always thinking, and he is always going to be faster than you.
We talked about that a little bit with William S. Hart.
Yeah.
Back in the silent era episode, where it's kind of like this more like silent, individualistic, stoic.
Did I tell you that I read, I went back to Akira Kurosawa's autobiography, and he mentions watching William S. Hart films as a kid?
I mean, that tracks. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I just think that was a really interesting, specific call out when we're comparing the different Western influences.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
And I think another contrast, especially in terms of the climactic build, and again, what you were talking about with building that tension the way that Leone likes to do, especially for the very last shootout. All of these have a final shootout. Actually, Duck Sucker might not. But the whole...
it kind of has like a final battle.
Yeah. But the whole Dollars trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Once Upon a Time in the West have like a final shootout. And I think it's so
that
interesting.
You like know is coming too. Like the second the movie starts, you just know it's going to end in a duel.
Right. And I think it's so interesting that here, where in contrast to the final duel in Sanjuro, where there's silence and you are on the edge of your seat for a really long time waiting for that duel to come to a head. Here, where Kurosawa uses silence, Morricone uses that, Leone, through Morricone, uses sound and uses that motif that's been playing throughout the film to build that tension, again, to the breaking point. But it's interesting that it's the complete opposite technique from Kurosawa, but it's still just as effective because it's built into the fabric of how the film works.
Yeah, for sure. The shift in tone is significant, but it's also very clear that Leone is just a very big fan of Westerns.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, that kind of makes a lot of sense, aside from the time that he grew up as a kid being one of the, not his super young age, like early 30s, but late 30s into the 40s would have been one of the golden eras of like John Ford making Western movies. So it makes sense that he would have been exposed to that, especially working at Cinecittà and having family in the business and being exposed to American filmmaking. It's clear that he really likes it. And in a lot of ways, while he might be deconstructing the West with movies like this, he's also heightening it, but in his own like super stylized way that you kind of see like come about also from like other people around this era who are more like film bratty, who are people who grew up studying film and watching film from the time they were babies, and started just heightening and playing with style as well. And you'd see this one's very stylized. Once Upon a Time in the West is very stylized. Duck You Sucker, we'll see, is very stylized. Definitely close to the point of being like a Tarantino or Wes Anderson, like putting graphics up on the screen level of stylization.
It's almost a parody of a Leone movie in itself.
Yeah, in a way, yeah, right? And I like that you brought up parody because I do think it is tempting to see these as parodies of the West, of poking fun at it. I think it's a slightly different take on the West, but if anything, it's kind of a pastiche in a lot of ways because I think it comes from a place of love.
Yeah,
I think it just
sure.
comes from that kind of like different worldview that you see from people who were doing work in the 60s where it's a little more unrestrained and gory and more direct depiction of some very disturbing things.
And that's a good point because I think, and this may be kind of an overall note, but the fact that these are all coming out in the 60s and 70s, you know, we've talked about the American New Wave, which was around the same time. And obviously Leone wasn't directly, for the most part, working under the American code system or studio system, but
which is a big part of how his movies ended up the way they did.
Right. Which is my whole point, because I got to see if I can find this clip, because I swear I've seen an interview with Clint Eastwood saying that under the production code, you weren't allowed to show someone getting shot and the person shooting them in the same frame. And Clint Eastwood says Leone didn't know that, and so I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him that was the rule. And so he's just showing people getting shot and shooting people all over the place.
Honestly, it makes the gunfights feel way different because I will say,
because you've got someone in a window and someone down on the street, and you see the gun go off and the person fall at the same time. That's a different level of action.
Yeah. And I don't think we talked about it because I think we just took it for granted in the John Ford era. But a lot of the action happens across those cuts. It kind of partitions off like the cause and the effect in a way that both makes the pacing very exciting, but also dulls the impact of some of the action.
Yeah, to an extent. Yeah, all right. So I think there's still a lot I want to say in terms of style, but we could save a lot of that for overall, and it'll work its way in here. Anything else about For a Few Dollars More?
Oh, man. No, not really. There's one or two specific things that I'm kind of just saving for overall notes.
Yeah, because we could get into the details of the backstory and stuff like that, but I think I think it's so interesting looking back on all three of these movies. They all have almost the exact same structure of weaving the backstory, this super vague backstory throughout the story, just for a payoff at the end.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. Like the backstory only being revealed at the final battle is such like a. It is an anime trope, but it's also like just a genre storytelling trope.
Yeah.
So I think you'd see it in like comic books a lot, which were getting really big in the 60s, right? You'd see it in Western movies and sci-fi movies and stuff like that, where everything only makes sense at the very end. And is
especially those genres,
many different
like you said,
a good storytelling technique.
Yeah, and especially in those genres like you're talking about, that there's usually something about the world that's not as it seems or as it should be, and so those payoffs work really well. But here it's set more or less in the real world, and given all the mythologization that we've been talking about, but it still works that way. But yeah, we'll talk about kind of all the payoffs at the end.
Yeah, and it's specifically, I just want to point out in this movie, when it comes to that, one of the reasons it works so well is the idea that we live in this dark, dirty West, and that there isn't really a reason where everyone's like selfish, and there isn't really a reason for these two bounty hunters to be working together past a certain point. And even the fact that Manco, or the man with no name, is the one who's consistently like, we should really stop working together. This doesn't make sense.
Yeah, he's
anymore.
trying to get away from him.
And Lee Van Cleef is the one who keeps insisting on working together. And at a certain point, you can see it kind of itch off and start itching in Manco's brain. Like, there's something about this guy that isn't following these selfish rules of a bounty hunter.
Yeah.
And that also starts to itch in the audience's brain up until the point where you're like, okay, there's something about this guy that doesn't fit with the rules of this world as established. But he clearly has a reason for not fitting. But what is it? What's going on? And when it's finally explained, you get that catharsis of, oh, that's why. Yeah. That's why he doesn't quite fit with everything else. And I think that's one of Leone's favorite story techniques. And we'll see it again and again.
For sure. Well, let's get into the next version with Once Upon a Time in the West from 1968. Jason, set us up.
Once Upon a Time in the West from 1968. Just outside of Flagstone at the Sweetwater Ranch, where the new rail line is headed, a man and his children are gunned down by strange men in dusters. That same day, two more strangers arrive in town. The new widow of the deceased and a mysterious man who plays harmonica and seems to have an awful burden on his shoulders. They're on track for a collision course with the railroad tycoon Mr. Morton and his dead-shot gunman, Frank.
Well, how about some more trains in a Western movie, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Trains in a Western movie.
Trains, unstoppable progress, manifest destiny,
Trains,
squash the wee
Eastern
little guy.
Tycoon. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
A Homestead Murder, sound familiar? A Homestead Massacre, rather.
Yeah, full-on massacre.
That's almost straight out of the Searchers.
Searchers level, yeah, yeah. Except this time it's Henry Fonda being as disgusting as he possibly can be.
Oh yeah, which is hilarious.
Because he's such a hero in American cinema when most roles he plays, and in this one, him and Leone were like, "How disgusting can we make me?"
Yeah,
they really did it.
Well, it's so funny because in this little, Western canon that we're making out of this series, we have him as our, he's the Wyatt Earp from our very early days of solidifying what the Westerns are from My Darling Clementine. The Wyatt Earp in that movie is basically the Musashi Miyamoto of of the West, and
legendary hero of that era. Yeah.
Here he's the Tatsuya Nakadai from Sword of Doom. Basically, he's basically flipped completely 180 in terms of being
psychopath,
completely just heartless. Yeah,
he is terrifying. And also, I don't know who needs to hear this, most of you probably already know this. Don't chew tobacco. It
gosh.
is one of the grossest things you could possibly do. It is so nasty. And if you need an example of why it's so nasty, or you don't believe me, just check out Henry Fonda in this movie. It is disgusting.
Yeah. So yeah, but beyond Henry Fonda, we have Charles Bronson, who, fun fact, I think was approached to play the man with no name every time they made a Dollars movie until The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, when Clint Eastwood was just solidified in there. But between him and who plays the other guy? Cheyenne, the Cheyenne character, you basically have the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly character setup again in Once Upon a Time in the West, which I feel like a lot of times, you know, Leone finds something that works and he just kind of remolds it for each story, wrapping it around different themes, which is kind of what makes his spaghetti westerns so iconic, because the way you make something iconic is you give a lot of things that are recognizable that you can latch onto, and almost everything about the way that he made movies was repeatable and recognizable. And so that's kind of that applies to the visuals, that applies to the sound, and that applies to the themes and even the character developments.
Yeah. He definitely has this set that he likes to work with, and he does like using them. And they are, I will say, this is one of the more compelling ugly characters. Although Cheyenne doesn't do too much over the course of the movie, but he's a relief if nothing else. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. He is kind of a relief character. We also have one of our larger female roles in a Leone movie. Normally, there's not a super big female role, but in this one, we have a big female lead who actually gets to do quite a bit and kind of comes out the best out of any of the characters by the end of the movie.
Yeah. And she gets to make Henry Fonda look even sleazier.
Yeah. She kind of ends up standing in for the true idea of like progress and development.
Yeah, that's really interesting. An interesting aspect of this, because we've talked about, again, bringing in the trains again. So this movie revolves around trains. Okay, so it's about the railroad coming through. It's the classic, it's the classic Emperor Cusco's going to destroy your town for his, progress thing. But there's also there's two different power dynamics, because it's not about stopping the train coming through. It's about who is in control of that particular spot or whatever.
Yeah.
And so she's not trying to stop the progress. She's trying to benefit from it. So it's almost kind of a rags to riches American dream kind of a thing. It's just there's a lot of opposition that she has to face up to.
It's like the idea of like, will the little guy come out on top, or will the big like Eastern Railroad tycoon and his henchmen steamroll them? Yeah,
the little guy might not come out on top, but his whole family will get murdered, and his wife of 1 month will come out on top.
Yes. Yeah. We're not given a lot of like idea of like how that happened, but
yeah, we get kind of enough that he went to New Orleans and had a good time and latched on to this one woman of disrepute, if you will.
Get drunk in New Orleans, come back with a wife. That's how it goes.
Yep. Or don't come back with a wife and have her send herself a month later.
That was weird to me, but I guess it worked for the plot.
Yeah.
I didn't have enough time to really question it.
There's really not. And it doesn't matter, because once you're into, Charles Bronson blowing his harmonica and stuff, you're not really thinking about all those details.
Yeah, right. How about the pacing in this movie? We were talking about for a few dollars more, Leone going low and slow, but this one is very low and slow. This one came after Good, the Bad, and the Ugly too. And Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is actually quite quickly paced compared to a lot of Leone films.
It's spanning. There's so much packed into The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And there's a lot packed into Once Upon a Time in the West too, but it's really stretched And again, not
Once Upon a Time in the West has that itchy, uncomfortable tension in it that makes you want people to shoot each other.
Yeah.
Which plays right into Leone's hands.
which again, going back to our very first episode, one of the very first points that we made that I still stand by, which is the way that Spielberg sets up his films in the first 10 minutes, and he basically gives you the film in 10 minutes, and then you see the rest of the film, which follows the same structure. And that's Once Upon a Time in the West is one of the most classic examples of that, with that opening scene of the three thugs waiting at the train station for so long while we're watching the credits. And the guy's, he's wiping the fly away. The guy's got water dripping on his hat, and you're just watching them wait and wait and wait. And then the train finally comes, and it looks like no one gets off. And then the train leaves, and Charles Bronson's on the other side, and they have 2 lines or something. And then Charles Bronson shoots them all in 2 seconds. And it's amazing.
It's a really good character introduction.
It's a good character introduction, but it's a good film introduction, because that's the way that the whole film feels. It's building to that final climax, which is what Sergio Leone was so good at.
Yeah. It's just heaping more tension, pressure, and stakes onto like 1 second of action, and then giving you that 1 second of action all at once.
Yeah.
I will say too, the backstory in this one is really good. I really like the backstory.
It totally caught me off guard the first time I watched it.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's not quite something you would have guessed, but it's really good.
Yeah. And it actually belongs to our primary hero in this film, rather than being kind of the secondary hero for a few dollars more. So again, Leone is taking these things that work and kind of weaving them in a little tighter into the narrative here, I feel like.
Yeah, it's kind of a remix of that idea of because it's existing outside of a trilogy that doesn't already have a hero. Mm-hmm. We can just have the person with the backstory be
right, because the man with no name has to have no backstory. So here we have a little more freedom. And again, that backstory plays in with the harmonica, and for a few dollars more, we had the music box. Here we have the harmonica, and it's this another way that Ennio Morricone is working in diegetic sound motifs, musical motifs, into the plot and the story. And I think it's really great. The use of the harmonica is awesome, because harmonicas, are powered by your breath, and in some sense, your breath conveys your confidence. It conveys your life. And the ways that they use that harmonica in different ways convey those different things. It conveys confidence. It conveys, vitality. It even conveys death at points. And so it's just this really great meta element that runs through the whole thing. And it also gives a lot of weight to Charles Bronson's character, because it's his signature. Every time he shows up, before we see him, a lot of times we're hearing that harmonica.
Yep. Playing when he ought to speak and speaking when he ought to play.
Exactly. And he can shoot too.
Exactly. Huh. Okay. I want to hear about this, because I know you have a lot to say about it. Wow. Especially because I don't remember this other film particularly well. But what are the connections between this film and Rango?
I'm not going to tell you.
You're not going to tell me?
I'm not going to tell you until next month, Alex. That was just a side note.
You're going to save it for next time?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind then.
I have so much more to say about Rango now. I'm so excited.
Oh, we'll consider that a teaser for Rango coming soon on the Filmlings podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yet again, we have some very dirty, no good types playing in this movie. I will say this one has... all of them have like a scene of is like some very like nasty violence towards a female character. This one has a really weird one that I still don't entirely understand, where obviously there's the Henry Fonda creepy scene, but there's also the one where like harmonica like mad dogs the female character, and I still don't entirely understand that scene. It just makes me very uncomfortable.
I think that's kind of the idea, because we're still figuring him out at that point. Oh, was that part of signaling? Because that was at the very beginning, and he tears
really
her
early.
dress or something, and then sends her out to the well because he knows that there's guys out there, and she's kind of bait for him to see who he needs to pick off. So I feel like that was some kind of signaling, but it was kind of a little bit unnecessary. But then there's also Cheyenne's little, his little, workplace harassment where he's like, go bring those guys water. And if anyone touches you on the butt, just forget about it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's supposed to be funny.
There's a lot of moments of that too that are also very of the 60s in that very inappropriate way, where there's supposedly like this sexual revolution at the time, but also a lot of it was just like harassment and abuse too, just more straightforward on screen.
Yeah.
Like the 60s were also the era of like like the start of James Bond too, right?
That's a good point. This feels very far removed from James Bond, but I see what you're saying.
You see the connections with like the sexual harassment, like or Mad Men, stuff like that. That is inappropriate, and sometimes that just feels unnecessary to my eyes. But also, I guess that's just in essence like the time period this comes from. Eventually we decided that maybe that wasn't the best thing to put in a movie.
Yeah. I mean, we have brownface in the next film, so we've talked about plenty of films that are of their era.
Yeah. Oh, we do, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah. That's right.
But so one thing also that I want to talk about before we move off of this film is that there seems to me in these films and in Leone's whole oeuvre is this almost scaling up of the kind of political and power dynamics and opposition that he's talking about. So in A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More, the scale of the conflict is very small. It's personal vendettas. Yeah. Even in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is set on the backdrop of the Civil War, the Civil War doesn't necessarily play a part into the plot. It's just kind of a set dressing. It's
part of the setting.
Yeah. But here we do get more of that, trains represent progress. They represent the world moving forward. They represent a lot of this. And you have our arch bad guy who's the cripple in the train, who kind of represents this bourgeoisie kind of, again, squash the little guy kind of a character in order for him to live his best life of manifest destiny. I don't exactly know what he wanted. I feel like he just wanted to go from coast to coast on his little Snowpiercer train. But you see this.
I think there's some element of like trying to build this like achievement that will outlive him, since he's got the consumption.
Yeah.
And he's doomed to die an early death.
Tuberculosis of the bones.
Tuberculosis, surprisingly deadly disease.
Yep. Keeps coming up. But so you see that, we're getting a little bit bigger, like a lot. So there's still those personal vendettas worked in there, but we also have this power system that's becoming part of the antagonism. And in Duck You Sucker, it's going to get even bigger because we have an entire revolution that is a huge part of the actual conflict in that film. So I just think that that's an interesting kind of thing to track across the trajectory of these films, is that Leone's figuring out what works. He's figuring out all of these little elements and retooling them, and but building them on top of these bigger and bigger kind of social commentaries.
Yeah, the scale gets much bigger between the movies. That's definitely true. Until it gets deeply personal again in Once Upon a Time in America.
Yeah, that is kind of, but the film itself gets bigger. Yeah.
It's like, what if we go like smaller in terms of space to like one neighborhood, but longer in terms of time and go like 3 to 4 decades?
Yeah. But I mean, gangsters are a type of political entity, I guess.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess since we're not going to talk about Rango, we should move on to Duck You Sucker from 1971. Jason, take it away.
Duck You Sucker from 1971, otherwise known as A Fistful of Dynamite. In the midst of the Mexican Revolution, an immoral bandit named Juan Miranda has an explosive meeting with exiled IRA demolition expert John H. Mallory. Juan has his heart set on robbing the Bank of Mesa Verde and coerces John into blowing open the doors for them. What they find inside isn't gold, but a path that will lead to the heart of the revolution they'd both been avoiding.
Alex, our murdered Irishman from the beginning of Once Upon a Time in the West, gets his revenge in a big way.
Yeah, don't mess with James Coburn in this movie. He's quite explosive.
Yeah, I love James Coburn. He plays such different characters. Because he was the Texan in Charade. I'm pretty sure he was in Magnificent Seven. He's just so good.
He's fairly prolific. He's in a lot of things.
Yeah.
He's a very good character actor.
From Nebraska.
Who really breathed a lot.
Which is interesting. Because all of his characters are so distinctly kind of some type of, like, the Texan. He's got the Texas accent. Here, he's the Irishman. He's got the Irish accent. But he's just a guy from Nebraska.
Just Nebraska.
But it's so much fun, this film. And this film, again, I think has that dynamic of the good and the ugly with James Coburn and our Rod Steiger character, who is playing a Mexican, which is interesting. But it's so much fun.
I watched this whole movie and did not realize that was Rod Steiger.
Yeah.
Until I looked at the credits at the end and I was like, oh.
He's completely unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And we talked about the outrage where Paul Newman plays a Mexican. But yeah, as ill-advised as it is, he takes the role and runs with it.
Yeah. Everything is very played up. I will say this is definitely the most stylized and almost to some level like cartoonish action.
It's just exaggerated. Just look at the poster for this movie.
So big and explosive.
Coburn and Steiger flying on motorcycles with dynamite flying out of their coats.
I will say it's like the most the one of the things that does keep it a little grounded though is like how solid like the archetypes behind both characters are. One's like a fallen crusader for a cause from another land, and one is just like a completely amoral, like selfish bandit.
Bandito.
Yeah, who is like you just see him do like awful stuff over the course of the opening scene.
Yeah.
By the way, the opening scene is 30 minutes.
Is it really?
I just want to throw that out there. It is continuous action from the moment the movie starts to the moment that James Coburn and Rod Steiger's character, or Juan and John, say goodbye to each other after their initial meeting. That is almost all continuous action. I think there's a point where he like takes a nap, but it's portrayed as continuous. Like they do not leave that space. They travel with the wagon a little bit between different locations, but it's all basically one scene or sequence for 38 minutes at the start of the movie before we finally move on to somewhere else and the movie jumps time frames. It is crazy how long it is, but it is a really good opening scene that kind of sets up everything, how awful the bourgeois characters are in this movie, how also awful the bandits are in this movie.
It gave me this sense of like a Louis Buñuel F the bourgeoisie fever dream of just what is the most ridiculous thing we could do to a train full of rich people. Yeah,
because they're not just like, they're like cartoons of rich people too, right? Like they're awful.
They're just sitting
they're not
there,
just like a normal level of awful.
bad
like
mouthing peasants to his face while he's sitting there, and then it's haha, gotcha.
Yes, and very much so.
Then everything else, which is almost the most extreme part of the whole movie is that first 30 minutes, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, in terms of just sheer outlandishness. The rest of it becomes a little, like you said, a little more grounded. And I do think that it's really well done. Again, the way that the themes have scaled up to a revolution, and the way that we've incorporated the themes of these two characters, one from has just escaped a revolution and has now gotten wrapped up in this next revolution, and the other who's just trying to survive and take what he can while basically being on the, I don't even know which side of the like the losing or the winning side of the revolution he was on, because it's so just jumbled in this film. But
well, so was the Mexican Revolution.
So was the revolution
1910 to 1920.
Yeah. But yeah, the way that those two characters come together and their themes come together, and you're able to build in, actually the backstory in this one is the most interesting, and weird and strange and maybe metaphoric. I don't actually know what was happening. But it does the same thing where we build it all up, throughout the story, and big payoff at the end, kind of less of a big payoff, but just weird.
Yeah. It's more like, it's interesting because I love actually the arc that the Rod Steiger's Juan is on over the course of this movie, because he's essentially like, I just want gold. That's all I want. I want the gold in the Bank of Mesa Verde. I don't want anything to do with the revolution.
Yeah.
The revolution's stupid. It just gets people killed. And then every decision he takes just manages to get him turned more and more into a hero of the revolution. Mm-hmm. Every single decision he takes, it's supposed to get him closer to what he wants, gets him closer to what ostensibly should be like, what would be the goal of like a character in a movie from the 1940s of becoming a hero of this war and liberating his country. But that's not what he wants. He just wants gold. Yeah. So
you kind of get the sense that Coburn's character is nudging him, like because he's been through this revolution thing before. He knows kind of how it's going to go. So he's always shoving him in front of the crowd, with a kind of a wink and a nod.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he recognizes that. I mean, I don't want to defend Juan because he does some awful things over the course of the movie, but like he's
our protagonist,
more intelligent
still.
Yeah, he is a protagonist, and he has like that character ability to create change, to bring people to him, and he is surprisingly intelligent, considering how he depicts himself. Yeah. And quite clever, and would be a good fit for a revolutionary role in like overthrowing a government. But it's not what he wants. I think there's also an element of it too that is like James Coburn's character kind of like, I think James Coburn's character gets exactly what he wants. I think John wants to explode. I think he's got a death wish over the course of this movie.
Yeah, you definitely get that sense right off the bat. I mean, his complete nonchalance.
All those like really slow flashbacks.
Yeah, with the weird friendship romance thing. I don't know.
They're like throuple thing they've got going on.
Was she supposed to represent the revolution? Like they were both in love with the revolution, and then they got stabbed in the back. It's just a really weird way to do that, and like it's almost so vague to be nonsensical.
It's definitely really weird. It does feel like a bit like a fever dream, right? Yeah. Especially because it almost all takes place in like this Britain this Britain and Ireland that is the British Isles, that are very green, very verdant. Everyone's very clean.
Stark contrast to the Mexican landscape.
To the dirty, sweaty, fly-ridden, horse poop-ridden, like landscape you see over the course of most of the film. Yeah, but it is. There's definitely like a lot of the backstories are fairly vague, but the intent is there. Yeah, and I think the characters ultimately wind up Coburn's character winds up where he wants. I don't know if I've ever felt quite as bad for a character as I have when at the end of the movie where Juan just looks at the camera and goes, "What about me?"
Yeah.
After his friend dies, and now he both has something in the sense that he helped win the revolution, but he also has nothing because he lost everything along the way.
Yeah.
And didn't even get any gold.
Didn't even get any gold.
Didn't even get any gold.
Yeah. But I do think that there's a really interesting nuance in John's character, Coburn's character, which is that he's got the world weary kind of thing about him, right? Where he's seen too much, he's been through too much, and he's kind of over it. But then at the same time, you have that moment. There's no big shootout in this one, which is one of the departures. But there is that moment where he takes. There
is a big shootout in the sense that there's a war.
There's a war, yeah. There's a shootout all around them all the time. But there's the big moment where he takes the doctor who's betrayed all of his compatriots, and they get on the train that's going to blow up the other train to stop the army or whatever. And the
doctor who ended up betraying, I do want to be specific. He ended up betraying his compatriots in the same way that his friend back in Ireland ended up betraying his compatriots by being captured and tortured.
Right.
So there's a deep personal connection
murdered.
In addition to the practical betrayal going on.
Right. Which, yeah, and I think that it's so interesting because it's not just a character who's been betrayed, but it's a character who's been betrayed in the past and has kind of made some kind of, I don't know if it's even peace with it. It's almost a peace with it. And so when it happens again, that bitterness has already lost its edge. And he's the only character in this film who could have found that out without being completely bitter about it. And he doesn't directly kill him, right? But he gives him an out.
Oh, he even tells him to save himself.
Yeah, he gives him an out, but he has also kind of given him this almost in a Les Mis kind of a way. He's shown him this kind of a mercy that also shows how undeserving the character is of that mercy, and gives him this guilt that he just ultimately can't live with. So there's actually this really interestingly complicated and nuanced element to this climax that is surprising in such an over-the-top film, even for such a genre type of director as Sergio Leone.
It's also interesting because the doctor chooses not to live with his guilt anymore by staying on the train.
Right.
But Coburn's character also carries guilt with him because he shot his friend in the flashbacks and has made the opposite decision, has decided to live with that guilt. And ironically enough, by the time he's kind of seemed to have made a peace with it after the doctor's betrayal, is when he finally gets shot in the back.
Right. By another cartoonishly evil character.
Yeah, who feels almost more like Nazi.
Yeah, he's definitely like a Nazi kind of thing.
Giving me Nazi vibes, even though in the Mexican army.
Yeah.
But I guess it kind of makes sense from Leone because Leone was like basically like the same age as the kids in Rome Open City. So
yeah,
like,
that's true.
You know, it tracks that like the boogeyman, the military boogeyman in a Leone movie would mimic the military boogeyman of his childhood. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, this one is it's such a interesting kind of hodgepodge, over the top, but also with some kind of deep undercurrents to it. It's a really interesting addition to this whole conversation.
Have we talked about the moment where there's literally the text on screen, Bank of Mesa Verde, that appears over James Coburn?
I forgot about that. Oh yeah, he glows, and Juan is looking at him, and he just sees, "You're my ticket. You're my ticket into the gold."
It looks like the way it's depicted, it looks like the magic door opening in Lord of the Rings. And I think a similar like vibe is intended where it's like, yeah, you're the door. You're the open door to that bank that I've been dreaming of robbing my whole life.
But that's the only time it happens. It's not like a Wes Anderson consistent stylistic choice.
No, I think that's that sort of idea of putting that text on screen is still very new.
Yeah.
At that point, and like there was, especially coming off of like the classical Hollywood era, which was ending around there, which is all about like, you shouldn't know you're watching a movie while you watch a movie. To kind of have that more in these more genre spaces and the European space where you're outside of the code and outside of the big Hollywood system directly, you kind of have the freedom to do this sort of thing more and experiment with that.
And this whole film does feel like Leone, not necessarily resting on his laurels, but kind of using his accumulated attention to kind of have a little bit more fun, which is kind of part of the problem with the distribution of the film, which was that I don't remember the whole details, but it didn't screen very well, or it just didn't get quite enough ticket sales. And so they rebranded it, and the studio wasn't super happy with it. But yeah, so they rebranded it as A Fistful of Dynamite to try and pick up on the success of those films. So the distribution is a little messy, but it does feel like Sergio Leone breaking form for himself a little bit, but using enough of it and just kind of playing around and having fun.
Yeah. I will say another moment that felt very stylistic to the point of almost being in like a Tarantino or Anderson movie is the moment where they're watching one of the early fire. They just got to Mesa Verde. They're watching the firing squads, but they're watching it from behind the wall, and he kind of like clears out that line in the poster with like this precise geometry.
Oh yeah.
And places his eyes in the space that the poster's eyes had been. That's another moment that feels very specifically stylistic to me, where it's playing with not just like stuff inside the frame, but the bounds of the frame itself.
Frame within a frame.
To kind of like create something that's a little meta in its stylization.
Yeah. All right. Shall we move into overall notes and talk about all of these things that make up Sergio Leone?
Yeah. Another thread that I'd like to draw across all these movies is that they mostly end up being about revenge. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's about gold, but oftentimes in the final brush, it ends up being about revenge. Actually, even in the movies where it starts off as being about gold, something happens that makes it personal.
Right.
I think that's because like Sergio Leone is depicting this more selfish version of the West where everyone's out for themselves. And so it makes sense that everyone's making decisions based around whether or not it'll make them rich. But also at the end of the day, the most compelling character on screen is going to be the one making a very deeply personal decision.
Yeah.
And so giving all these people like, having these horrible acts happen in their past to give them these deep motivations to seek the most like precise revenge they can have. Like think about like how precise Harmonica's revenge has to be. Not only does he have to win a duel with a specific person, that person has to stay alive long enough for him to put a harmonica in his mouth.
Stuff that harmonica right in there.
He's riding on a lot to make that plan happen. Like that's not luck based. That's like, I want something very specific to happen. And you can tell over the course of the movie too, he had plenty of chances to just murder Frank.
There's a whole sequence, which I just realized that it's so interesting about that film is there's this whole sequence where he teams up with Frank to murder Frank's gang that has turned on Frank because they got paid more by Train Guy. And so, and then the girl is super confused and she says, those were his men. Or no, then she gets mad and she says, you let him live after all this? Like, we all know you want to kill him. And he said, I didn't let them kill him. And that's not the same thing. And that's kind of a huge deal.
Yeah, it kind of makes it clear that like Harmonica's, one, it makes it interesting because it adds to the mystery. But two, it also makes it clear that Harmonica's revenge is not necessarily like some kind of noble revenge like what the Wyatts are out for in My Darling Clementine. It's deeply personal.
Yeah.
It's almost like
He
a
wants it to
sadistic
hurt.
level of revenge.
Yeah.
Like he's like, I want to draw it out. I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to kill you slow.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that's going on here. And that's the kind of revenge you see here, which is for the movie scene in the 1960s, something fairly new and something that I'm sure is very interesting and made these westerns these spaghetti westerns much more appealing compared to their conventional narratives or their conventional companions that would have been occurring at the same time in Hollywood.
Yeah. And when you think about it, a lot of the films we talked about, even with John Ford, were essentially revenge tales. But I think it is that element of the really, really dark backstory that makes it stand out that much more.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure. I will say too, before this point in Western history, you had good scores, but I don't think you had truly iconic scores. And you definitely didn't have scores that were to the point where like the score being a certain way was part of the genre. But after Ennio Morricone's work with Leone, it is part of the genre.
Yeah.
The music in a Western piece has to be a specific way and be part of the genre. And
to the extent that I think
Tarantino
used Morricone, at least for The Hateful Eight and maybe also for Django.
I mean, you got
as long as he's there, you can't not use him.
Yeah. But I did want to say, it also makes me very interested and excited to see what Western musical motifs we find in the classic animated Western film Rango coming up.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more. There's at least one reference to Apocalypse Now where we use the Ride of the Valkyries. So that gives you something.
Watch out for the Rango-sode coming up on the Filmlings. An episode 5 years in the works.
Ostensibly, we'll be talking about 3 films next time.
But mostly Rango. But yeah, also a much slower pace than any Hollywood film. And I'll throw in here too that like there's some other stylistic choices that are made. Long and close-up shots. Mm-hmm. To break that down, the first long is referring to time, so shots that last a long time, and also long shots as in a very wide shot far away from characters, but also long held as in time, close-up shots, close on the eyes, to a stylistic point. And I think what that really shows is that Leone, working outside of the bounds of Hollywood, although he did do some work with Paramount, was free to kind of break the conventional molds of how you make a Western movie and experiment with it a little bit, and punch in closer than a Hollywood movie would, or hold longer than a Hollywood movie would. And these aren't things that you didn't see to some extent in a Ford film. Ford did use close-ups, and he did use longly held wide shots. In fact, he famously used longly held wide shots for scenes he wasn't the biggest fan of. But
Leone uses them on purpose. Yeah.
He uses them for a purpose, for a reason to add to and create his style and his sense and his theme and his tone. And in addition, you get stuff like what we talked about in Ducky Sucker, where occasionally you'll see like a flash of text on screen.
Yeah.
Which is just wild within the context of these movies, but would not be out of place for any more modern movie. Like that is something we've kind of come to expect to see in a movie these days.
And the other thing Leone was super famous for is mixing those close-ups and those long shots. I remember in film school learning, I think it was which film does it come from? I think it's from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but there's a long shot of a bunch of stuff happening, or just a landscape kind of a shot. And then all of a sudden, one of the thugs' faces comes into frame, and it's so close up, it's almost just his eyes, like his eyes to his bottom lip. And so you go straight from a wide shot to a close up without cutting. And Leone did that really, really well. And you see that in ways that you've got 2 or 3 guys in your showdown here, and then the camera pans over and you're seeing the hip of someone with their gun. So it's a close up and a long shot at the same time. And interestingly, that actually might be partly influenced by Kurosawa, because there are a lot of elements in Yojimbo and Sanjuro. Like in Yojimbo, when he's in the little restaurant, the guy's little sake shop, they're looking through the bars. They're kind of, it's kind of a fortress of sorts for that movie. But you've got Yojimbo, or you've got Sanjuro rather, and the bartender with their faces really close up to the camera, and you've got a lot of action happening through this little slit in the slats. And so you've got that mix. And so Leone takes that and kind of accentuates that and builds it into his visual motif for these spaghetti westerns.
Yeah. He builds his whole visual style. I mean, like we said at the top of the episode, right? Like, Leone is not the only guy doing spaghetti westerns. He's just the most iconic.
Yeah.
By a country mile, doing spaghetti westerns. Who kind of has created his own style that now is kind of inseparable. And it's fascinating, right? Because Kurosawa was a big fan of Ford. Obviously, Leone, big fan of both Ford and Kurosawa. So like we talked about, this whole thing kind of builds on itself and just collects more as it goes along. It doesn't really lose its roots ever. It just adds to it, and there's more in the bucket of the Western to pick from. And like we mentioned before in some of these individual breakdowns, there are some very violent moments in these films. Jonathan, you talked about how Leone didn't know the code, so he would show people shooting and getting shot in the same frame, which is something not allowed under the Hollywood code, but kind of became more popular in the gore-laden 60s of international filmmaking, especially in Italy. Italy also has a big giallo horror film movement that has a lot of these elements as well.
Oh, yeah.
That was around the same time. But also like the depiction of like sexual violence and sexual assault in these movies as well is both very indicative of the 60s and of new elements being introduced into the Western genre.
Yeah.
Not that was totally foreign, like some element of that would exist in films prior to this, but it would all be implied.
Very, very hidden behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. These are the movies that kind of like did the same thing, but essentially would be like, we're going to show it and we're going to make you
come to think of it, even Sword of Doom had an element of that, although it was all off screen.
Yes, exactly. The meeting in the mill specifically comes to mind. But a lot of it gets real, like just nasty.
Yeah.
Like for a few dollars or more, in the backstory, spoilers, Indio kills somebody who might be the colonel's son. I wasn't very clear on that.
The girl was the colonel's sister.
Oh, okay. There you go. The girl was the colonel's sister, but also he kills her beau and then proceeds to rape her, and to escape that, she steals his gun and instead of shooting him, shoots herself.
Yeah. In the middle of the act.
Yeah, which is dark.
Yeah.
So dark. Because it tells you a lot about like, essentially her beau is dead and she's been assaulted, and she's made the choice with gun in hand that she isn't going to try to survive that situation. She's like, my life has been ruined in this moment. I'm killing myself.
Yeah.
Which is dark. So the dark.
Interesting
Darker
thing
than anything you've seen in a Ford movie.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that though is, again, the way that Leone uses it is it's so high level. Like, that's all you need to know about it. You get just enough about what the connection is between those people and the colonel, and you don't get any connection of what Indio's connection to them is, except for the fact that he's just a really sleazy guy. But you don't know if, he was in love with her, she slighted him for this guy or whatever. Doesn't matter. The point is, he comes in, kills the lover, and rapes her. And
Yeah, might as well
that's-
be a random act from what we can
yeah,
see.
I mean, and it might be, but you get a little bit of a sense that Indio has some kind of feeling or attachment there or whatever, and whether that's just because she was beautiful or not, you don't really know.
Maybe in like a creepy stalker way.
Yeah. But the point is,
it's hard to tell. But it's vague because it's unnecessary.
yeah, Leone knows how to
for
give you
the
just
story.
enough to fuel the story, because you're getting bits and pieces as you go through. You're getting like a little bit of, them, the two lovers meeting and exchanging the lockets or the stopwatches with the music in them. And you're getting, and then the next scene, you see a few like scenes later, you get Indio is watching them through the slats. And then it's only until the very, very end where you get the whole murder, assault, suicide thing. But it's so dramatic at that point and it's culminates with that final duel that it just all pays off.
Oh yeah. He uses that violence to heighten what the stories he's telling. Of course, you would see that later on in other kind of film brats of the era. As I think what you're seeing specifically is films that were being created outside of the Hollywood code system, literally like physically removed, like in Europe, like Leone was doing, breaking those rules, and then that in turn influencing American film brats of the same era to push those rules until the code finally broke. And that's how you get filmmakers like De Palma, who was another famous film brat.
Also wore a lot of his influences on his sleeve.
Very specifically. And I think he had a lot of violence and sexual violence specifically in his movies, to a disturbing extent. And a lot of that you can see kind of being influenced by these movies being made outside of the code, like Leone. So definitely not Leone on his own, but Death by a Million cuts from a lot of different film industries around the world, kind of like helping pushing the code out in Hollywood, to open the way for different depictions of violence and other things on screen as the years go by. But also, I do want to talk about with Leone, as a compare and contrast to our last episode, where we talked about Chambara films in Japan. When looking at those films, we kind of saw the same sort of mythologizing and archetypical aspects of the Western genre, kind of being created within a different setting, similar themes, similar storytelling techniques, but with very different aesthetics and obviously a very different setting and cultural context. But this time we see something that, if not entirely the opposite, is definitely exchanging a few parts for the other. Where with Leone, a lot of the setting and the aesthetic are there, but the storytelling itself is quite different, where the hero's journey of the noble Western cowboy or gunman existed in a Ford movie, that's deconstructed even further than we saw in The Searchers or The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And the chivalric tones are discarded and often turned to the point of amorality in a lot of Leone's work. There's an emphasis on violence and elongated gun battles in addition to the signature duels at the end of the movies, and definitely a lot of combat that does not feel honorable. That context of honor is very specifically discarded, and when it is brought in a Leone movie, it's brought in for very specific moments, for very specific effect, and its effect is heightened because of its lack throughout the rest of the movie. The most notable example I can think of being the moment where Eastwood's Man with No Name keeps the duel fair in between the Colonel and El Indio at the end of For a Few Dollars More. And then, of course, this is not something we've really talked about over the course of most of this movie. And obviously the biggest exception is the Mexican Revolution and Duck You Sucker. But there is, compared to a lot of John Ford movies, near complete removal of any historical context. The West being explored in the Sergio Leone movie is one that is basically just straight up myth.
Yeah.
The town names are often made up, and you see ideas moved in that are similar, like the moving of the railroad, but not in the same historical context like you saw in the Iron Horse. Gone are the historical figures like Wyatt Earp or Buffalo Bill or the Musashi of the samurai movies. And in fact, you also barely see any, if ever, Native Americans in Sergio Leone movies or other spaghetti westerns as well. In fact, most characters don't even have a name.
Yeah.
Quite a few people, if they do have a name, have a fake name or just a nickname or something very basic like John or Juan.
Harmonica.
Or Harmonica. Another nickname, right? So it's literally, we talked about like how those John Ford movies were in the process of taking the history of the West and turning it into myth off of like the already mythological portions of pop culture that existed in the late 1800s, early 1900s are surrounding the idea of the West. But at this point with the Leone movies, we're basically just completely removed from any idea of historicity. The West in and of itself is a myth that exists outside of historical context at this point.
Yeah.
And while we consciously know while watching these movies that in some idea this time and place existed, there's nothing connecting it to the real world besides the fact that we're seeing people on screen. Which is fascinating, and I think another important step in the evolution of Hollywood, because I'll tell you what, Jonathan, unless you remove the historicity from the Western genre or get to a point where you can make a movie where the historicity is removed, you cannot have a Western where a lizard man becomes the sheriff of a town. That cannot happen if historicity is still in play, Jonathan, so you cannot have your Rango. So this is an important step that leads directly to Rango.
That's true. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Guess what,
That was
guys?
the whole point of this episode, guys.
Guess
We're
what,
setting
guys?
up
We're
Rango.
talking about Rango next time. Surprise. Yeah. No. I totally agree. And it does give that kind of final nail in the coffin to being, fully mythologized, which is almost a way to say it's fableized. It becomes a fairy tale. And there are certain rules that it has to follow, right, to kind of fit in that, to still be considered a Western or whatever. But you get a lot more flexibility when all you have are a set of tropes and not also a specific time and place that you have to fit into in order to be considered a Western. And so that's exactly what we're talking about next time. We're talking about what the modern idea of a Western is, the ways that Westerns can be made now that we have all of this history going from the silent films, the William S. Harts and the Tom Mixes, to John Ford's historically based, historically informed Westerns, through the transition into the samurai, the noble warriors, through the dirty, gritty bounty killers, to now what can we do if there's such a foundation, there's such a history of Westerns? How can we play with that genre? How can we...
It's a playground now.
Yeah. How can we homage the great films that have been made? How can we set Westerns in the modern day, or create Western films with modern sensibilities that still fit into that genre? So the films we're talking about, we're starting off with Rango from 2011. And Alex, speaking of the music,
What a surprise.
I just remembered that there's a chorus to Rango, like a Greek chorus that's a mariachi band.
There you go.
Which is great. Guys, yeah, I've been trying to get Rango on this podcast for a long time, and Alex threw me a bone on this one. And
it's been a long time. Yeah. Well, I had the idea to do the long dive on these seasons with like the courses and stuff. And I was like, Westerns would be a good one. And then we got to like the end. We got past like the spaghetti Westerns while in the planning phase. And I was like, like Westerns just really divulge. They go all over the place. Like they're kind of a grab bag now. Like you can kind of do whatever with a Western. What's better than you could do whatever than a Western idea than Rango?
Than a chameleon with a gun on his hip. Yep.
Exactly. Like if you can do whatever with a Western now, because the Western idea of the Western has become so iconic through repeated like layer caking of it through like Ford, Kurosawa, and Leone, that you can do, that's so identifiable that you can change out the humans for chameleons and it's fine.
Yeah.
You can do a Rango, right?
And I have to
thank you, Kurosawa and Leone, for giving us Rango.
I have to say too, I love Rango. But going through this course, even some of the films that I've seen before, I picked up on references in them that come up again in Rango that I have so much to talk about now. I'm so excited about Rango.
What are the other movies we're talking about next time?
So we're talking about Rango. We're also probably talking about Slow West from 2015. And,
although not as much as Rango.
Yeah. And Hell or High Water from 2016.
Although not as much as Rango.
Probably not as much as Rango. Yeah, I'm excited about all of these, mostly Rango. But it's going to be a great way to kind of wrap up this whole series, see where the Western is now. And there's still a lot of other things that we can, that kind of span off of that we might bring up. I remember when so Logan came out, Logan is considered kind of along the lines of Westerns. There's so many different ways that it can go. And we're going to get into all that next time. So stay tuned.
No Country for Old Men could definitely be considered a Western, although we've already covered it.
I want to work in Unforgiven, which is a really good kind of deconstruction of even deconstructed Westerns.
You can make an argument that The Last of Us is a zombie Western. That is...
Okay.
It is possible, especially considering that The Last of Us is basically Logan. But with zombies.
Yeah, I guess there is that thread in kind of a lot of zombie films. The kind of aimless wanderer, warrior type.
Yeah. There's huge elements of Walking Dead that are kind of Western in origin.
Even stuff like Book of Eli. Man, we're getting way too into this now.
And now you get into, and then you can get into other like international like pastiches and parodies of the Western, like The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, which we've already covered. But it's the point is that it is endless. That the genre itself has become so established through this process, all these different filters we've talked about over the course of the series, that it is so universal and recognizable that almost anybody has the freedom to play with it and use it as a tool in their storytelling, and can then in turn, by playing with it, add more to it. Right. Yeah.
But believe it or not, we'll have more to say about it next time.
Yeah, we'll still have more to say about Westerns. But that's about all the time we have for this episode.
To find links to things that we talked about today, as well as a complete list of past episodes and all 462 films we've covered so far, visit thefilmlings.com.
You can also join us for ongoing film discussions on our Discord server.
And to stay posted about upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter @thefilmlings.
Summaries for this episode were recorded by me, Blue Jay. You could find me on Twitter @thebluejay1994.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya. Can you imagine a Western adaptation of Don Quixote where instead of being a knight, he's trying to be a cowboy?
Yeah. I mean, it works, right? I mean, we've talked so much in this series in Westerns 101 about how much of the Western mythology has roots in the chivalric tales of medieval Europe.
I'm thinking too hard about this now. It's piquing my interest. But don't try and start a Don Quixote project.
Are you writing your own windmill to tilt at?
Yeah, never try to start a Don Quixote project. Lesson number 1 of Hollywood.